Live from Mitchell Hall at the University of Delaware, this is Delaware Debates.
Good evening, I'm Nancy Karibjanian. On behalf of Delaware First Media, WDDE 91.1 FM, and the University of Delaware Center for Political Communication, welcome to Delaware Debates 2012, made possible with the financial support of AARP Delaware and the American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network. I am joined by University of Delaware Professor of Political Science and International Relations, David Wilson, who will be co-moderating with me this evening. And our first debate includes the candidates in the race for Delaware's Lieutenant Governor. Democrat Denn, welcome, and he is the incumbent. Also joining us is the Republican Sher Valenzuela. Welcome to you. Tonight's debate is divided into two parts. Following a 1-minute opening statement by each candidate, David Wilson and I will be posing questions to the candidates. Their responses in this section will be limited to 1 minute and 30 seconds with a 1-minute rebuttal, and then the opportunity for a follow-up discussion among the four of us. Then we will be turning to the students for the University of Delaware and Delaware State University for questions. Responses in this section are limited to 1 minute. Each candidate will also have a 1-minute closing statement. Now, our live audience here in Mitchell Hall on the University of Delaware Newark campus know that there will be no applause during tonight's debate. A coin toss determined our order for this evening. And with that decision, we will begin with the incumbent Denn, who has the first opening statement.
Thank you. Good evening. Governor Markell and I took our oaths of office right here on the stage in Mitchell Hall almost 4 years ago in January of 2009. It was a very perilous time for our state and our country, in the middle of the worst economic crisis that we had faced in almost a century. And Delaware was hit a lot worse than most other states. And yet, working with the hardworking men and women of this state, we have things moving in the right direction. We've reduced the size of state government more than any administration in history, made historic improvements in our schools, made profound changes to improve the health and welfare of kids in our state, and been more successful getting people back to work than any state in this region. We're not going to be satisfied until every Delawarean who wants to work has a job, but we have come a long, long way. And I look forward to talking tonight about our successes and our plans for the future. Thank you for having us tonight.
And now the opening statement from Sher Valenzuela.
Thank you. 15 years ago, my husband and I started our business with one sewing machine in our one-car garage. And today we employ more than 70 people. We're winning work away from Chinese and Mexican competitors and bringing it back to Delaware. I'm running for lieutenant governor because I know how to create jobs. I'm also running to bring balance to our state government because women are 52% of our state, but men hold all 10 of the top political jobs, and I don't think that's right. I'm also worried about one-party control. It's dangerous, no matter whether you're Republican or Democrat, it's dangerous to have one-party control. Our government works best when there's a system of checks and balances, and I believe I can provide that. Thanks for having me here tonight, and I look forward to our discussion and to visiting with everyone here tonight.
All right, so let's get started. As we begin, obviously it's the economy, and depending on who you ask, are we better off today? The Delaware economy question brings about one answer. It's holding steady, but there's only been slight improvements, or is it worse now than it was 4 years ago? Most people realize that there are a lot out there that are just giving up on the job market, and they're finding dead ends in both job creation and in housing. So the method to fix this is the question. In the past, Delaware tried to entice businesses to come to the first state, big and small, to open up shop here. Does this strategy still make sense, considering the unpredictability of business? I call to mind AstraZeneca and their layoffs after the state's efforts to increase AstraZeneca's presence in the first state, MBNA, and other banks, all of which now are either smaller or non-existent corporate residents. So what is the fix?
The question's to me, Nancy.
Yes, it is.
I think it's a great question, and we pursue a balanced approach in Delaware. We realize that because we're a small state, we're not going to be able to offer the biggest incentives to companies to come here or stay here, and we have to create an environment here where companies want to locate and grow and expand. And the way that we figure out how to do that is by talking to business people. We talk to business leaders in Delaware, business leaders thinking about coming to Delaware, and ask them, what does the state need to do in order for you to come here and grow here? And the answers that we get are surprisingly consistent, and that really is what informs our strategy. Number one, They want the size of the government to be small because they want to have their taxes be as low as possible. And as I mentioned earlier, we've reduced the size of the executive branch of state government by more than any administration in history. Business likes that because they can see that we're trying to keep the cost of government down so their taxes will be lower. They're very consistent in saying they want improved public schools. For them, it's a workforce quality issue, and it's also an issue in terms of quality of life for their employees. So we've been very focused on improving our public schools. And they also say that they would like their regulatory burden to be as low as possible. And for that reason, both on an individual basis when we talk to businesses and also on a more formal basis with this process that the governor has initiated to re-examine all of our state regulations, we've been trying to be focused on removing regulatory burdens where they're unreasonable or unnecessary. So you're right that we need a balanced approach, and that's exactly what we're pursuing.
You have the opportunity for a 1-minute rebuttal.
I think that in order for a politician to understand what businesses need, you need to understand business. And the idea of talking to businesses and hearing that our first concern is to reduce the size of state government is a major disconnect. It's not about reducing the size of state government, although surely we don't want to see government increase in size. A smaller, more effective government is definitely the approach that we would seek to have. But it's the regulatory environment. We are 44th in the nation when it comes to small business friendly, and that is not an opinion, it's a fact. And so the idea of improving what we're doing and looking at nearby states, Virginia being a good example, of where businesses are locating on purpose because of the regulatory environment and a business-friendly environment, we need to incorporate best practices such as this, and I believe it takes a business mind and a business owner to know how to do that best.
So now we're into the moderated discussion portion on this question, and let's go to the issue of regulation. For a big business, and especially for the financial business, Delaware has often been accused of being too friendly. Where is the balance between making sure that there's a community that fosters small business growth and also allows the big businesses to come, but one that doesn't just throw everything away?
Well, you raise a very good point. Having appropriate regulations and reasonable regulations is very important, and we saw in the national economy the consequences of having a complete lifting of regulatory oversight with our financial markets, and there are a lot of people in Delaware and around the country who are suffering as a result of that. So our focus is on ensuring that we don't have unreasonable regulations, but also recognizing that some regulations, even from the perspective of business, are important. I think that with respect to our corporate law environment, which is I think what you were referring to in your question, that remains nationally respected around the country, both in terms of our courts and the services that we provide to corporations here. So I think that remains a strong point for our state, and we're very focused on keeping it that way.
But isn't Delaware too fragile with that base built almost exclusively on that for so long? Isn't that why Delaware is having difficulty recovering in this economy? 15 years ago, Delaware may have recovered much faster than the rest of the nation. That's not the case right now.
Well, most of our revenue streams, because of the recession, went down. Personal income tax went down. Real estate transfer tax went down. Fewer corporations around the country were formed, so of course the revenues that they got from that went down. But our revenues were down across the board. As we come back, more corporations and more LLCs are being formed, and Delaware remains and should continue to remain the domicile of choice for businesses around the country.
Yeah, I'd like to get Mrs. Valenzuela in on this. You mentioned that one-party control is kind of dangerous for government, but what about a one approach kind of focus on businesses being the only focus on starting jobs? Can that also be dangerous? If we put all of our eggs in one basket, we give tax breaks to businesses, we give them lots of incentives to come here. On the back end, couldn't that have a negative effect on just average everyday folks?
I'd like to find out where that is happening, that has a negative effect. I think we see good reasons to see that businesses are flocking to states that have an environment that's business friendly. And it is the engine that turns every community.
Well, let me give you an example. Delaware has reduced its number of full-time government employees. Doesn't that increase the unemployment rate for the state?
I guess you could say at some point it does, but in terms of creating community, it's the business sector that does that. And I'm looking at what is happening in our own state. We've got 26,000 small businesses. If you're looking at the engine again of the economy, we know that that's the conservative number, 70% of all new jobs come from small businesses. So the idea of understanding that mind and that need and that economy is very real.
Well, we get to stay on the issue of the economy
Yeah.
because David's now going to take us to the issue of the budget.
Yeah, I'll talk about budgets. It's true that nearly all states have some kind of balanced budget requirement. Even the state of Delaware has a balanced budget constitutional requirement and a statutory requirement. But even with these kinds of requirements, states still have deficits, right? So can you explain to folks why a balanced budget requirement or an amendment has minimal to no effects on deficits?
You're asking me?
Sure.
I think we have a spending problem. I think that, if you're operating, and again, as a family or a business, you're looking at your overhead and you're looking at your constraints and you cut where you need to, you turn down the heat, you turn off the lights, and you tighten your belt. I'm looking at the approach of a politician is about how much do we have to spend, and not really concerned as a taxpayer. I mean, you really do have to keep your doors open as a business owner, or as and keep your home operating. So it's a different mindset. I think that we have all kinds of opportunities in state government, certainly in the state of Delaware, to trim fraud, to trim abuse, and to trim what we could look at as being opportunities to trim what we're doing in terms of spending, and not look at business and taxes as being the fuel for that engine. I think that's an unlimited capacity, and we need to trim our budgets and operate more efficiently.
Can I ask a follow-up?
We'll go to that in the moderated discussion because I do need to let you have the opportunity, Mr. Denn, for your 1-minute rebuttal on that topic.
Sure, and we don't have a deficit in Delaware, and we're not permitted to have a deficit, and that's, I think, as it should be. And what that forces us to do, because we don't print money like the federal government does, is to sit down, which we do every December, and put together a proposed budget where the revenues are only adequate to, where we only spend what the revenues are adequate to support. And that requires a lot of hard choices. And I'm very proud of the fact that we were able to reduce the executive branch payroll by 400 people. And we did it without layoffs. We did it without expensive buyout programs. We did it by very careful management of our cabinet agencies. And I think it's been a good thing for the state. It's allowed us to keep taxes lower, and it's allowed us to make some very important investments in things like early childhood education that are important to the business community and will ultimately be very, very important for our economy.
Yeah.
Now we're into the follow-up.
So Delaware has no budget shortfall?
We're not permitted to. Constitutionally, we have to. In fact, we have a rainy day fund. We're actually only allowed to spend constitutionally 98%.
So what do you think the forecast is?
Yeah.
Is it pouring?
Well, we have, I'll tell you why that's a good question. Some states, including some states in our region, have a very politicized revenue forecasting process, and the estimates go up and down depending upon what elected officials might want them to be. Governor DuPont, many years ago, and every governor subsequently, has set up a very objective revenue forecasting process where we get pretty precise as you can be with revenues estimates of what they're going to be. So we'll sit down, I think, in December and get the next, it's called DFAC, get the next DFAC estimate, and then we'll know what we have to work with.
I think what occurs to me, though, is that for years the rainy day fund was considered untouchable. It was something that was to be the safety net for the state of Delaware. A lot of people are wondering, when is the safety net accessible? When should that decision be made to tap into those types of funds? Do you think that the state should be expending some of that money to perhaps get back up on top?
Absolutely not. I look at this as an opportunity to, I think we've almost become cavalier as citizens. Looking at the way that the government operates, we see it as cavalier in a sense. I'm looking at all, if you're reading the newspaper, and I'm sure we all are here, staying in touch with the news, reading about the abuse of dollars in Delaware government. And we've become glazed in our approach to reading that as citizens. I'm thinking about what's happened recently with DHSS. Our state auditor pointed out that $1 million was misdirected toward a particular entity without specific oversight. Where are these monies going?
Well, we're in the discussion portion, so you can address that.
Address the DHSS specifically?
If you want to address that part of it, but also the comment that there's a cavalier approach.
Well, I strongly disagree with the comment that there's a cavalier approach. As I said, this administration has been more effective in reducing the cost of state government, in reducing waste, and reducing personnel than any administration, literally since records have been kept. With respect to DHSS, I think there was a pretty strong disagreement between the auditor and our DHSS secretary about what the appropriate course of action was with respect to that entity. And I think there's still a disagreement about it.
Well, we could talk just about the weatherization program and these kinds of programs directly under your oversight, and the millions of dollars that were, according to the News Journal, grossly mismanaged and under federal investigation shut down because it was poorly run. I'm thinking about another
Well, wait, if we're going to put the
go ahead.
weatherization issue on the
ahead.
table, I need to give him
Sure,
the
go
opportunity
ahead.
to address it. You have about 30 seconds.
Well, I think it's a little bit more than a 30-second
I understand.
answer.
We'll come back to it if
Okay.
necessary.
We were praised by the federal government with respect to how we handled the weatherization program. We had some folks in the state agency who weren't doing their jobs. When we found out about it, then I shut the program down, not the federal government, and it stayed shut down until it was back up and running again properly. So we've actually been consistently praised. My office has been consistently praised by the federal government for helping them to find out what the problem was and fix it. And if I may, Nancy, since it was brought up, I mean, this, I think, is typical. This is sort of how the Tea Party is doing things now. There are personal attacks against people because we don't want to talk about issues because obviously the Tea Party point of view is not popular in
Are you saying
Delaware.
that your opponent is a Tea Party candidate?
She's endorsed by the Tea Party.
But that there's a difference between being endorsed and presenting yourself as such. Do you present
Absolutely.
yourself as such?
Did you accept the endorsement?
And the Tea Party is free to endorse whoever they do. I am not a Tea Party candidate. I don't attach myself to the Tea Party. I attach myself to a party, the Republican Party. And I look again at the News Journal's reporting of this. It was a front page above the fold, and it is on my website that the federal government defunded, actually, shut the program down because it was so riddled with waste, fraud, and abuse. And we've got umpteen investigations going on, taxpayer paid, for the weatherization program, other stimulus money that was also under your purview. And we could talk about that. I hope we do get into
I
the
think
issue of
we will
crime.
have to
Well, Nancy,
come
but
back
I
to it,
think-
but I do need to let you have one last word on
Sure,
this
'cause-
with respect to this topic, and then we're moving on.
Well, sure, because Mrs. Valenzuela said that she was endorsed by the Tea Party, but suggested that she didn't believe in what the Tea Party says.
No,
But
that is not
when
what I said.
when she appeared in front of a Tea Party rally in Philadelphia on July 4th, she told the Tea Party rally that the president's health insurance reform plan was going to allow him to create a new standing army at his disposal. And in Middletown, when she appeared before
Well,
the
let
Tea
me
Party.
encourage us to come back here when we have the opportunity, because I do want to move us
Thank you.
on
Sure.
with respect to the rules and the people who are keeping our time.
Thank you.
Which takes us to the issue of crime prevention, and this question goes to you, Mr. Denn. You saw the paper today, an 18-year-old was shot in Wilmington last evening, even before nightfall, and it is becoming an all too familiar headline in the state. You chair the Criminal Justice Council, and you have highlighted efforts to move funds to youth crime prevention and re-entry programs for released criminals. Yet crime continues to escalate in the state. So should communities in Delaware be taking drastic steps? I'm thinking of Philadelphia with their SURGE program, bringing in special police, prosecutors, and investigators to target criminals. Or as in Camden, where they're abandoning a local police force and going to a regional police force. Does any of this seem to be necessary at this time to get a handle on crime in Delaware?
Well, the first thing that's necessary and is happening now is for the city to actually allow the state to do what we have been offering to do for some time and provide more state police involvement in the city, both in a visible way in some of the areas where there have been the most serious crime issues, and then also in a less visible way in terms of trying to break up some of the drug activity that, as the newspaper has reported, is really underlying a lot of the violence. It has been more difficult than it should have been for us to get the city to let us come in and provide that help, but they are now letting us do that, and we're hopeful to see results from that. But as your question points out, there is another longer-term component to it, which is that we have people, very few of these crimes are being committed by people who are first-time offenders. Most of these crimes are being committed by people who have been in the correction system. And until we start doing a better job preparing people to go back out into the community and be productive members of the community and not reoffend, then we're going to continue to have that problem. So I think all of our law enforcement agencies are very supportive of the effort that I'm trying to get us focused on, of doing both, of trying to have more effective law enforcement, but also with a longer-term perspective, trying to be smarter about finding folks in our correction system where there's some potential to get them job skills and have them released back into these communities and be productive members of society. Both parts of it are important.
You take a more community approach. Let's go to your rebuttal on this question, and then we'll have our follow-up discussion.
Absolutely. This is the approach of a career politician. I look at this as something that is outrageous. We have a problem in Delaware, home invasions up and down the state right now. We did not know about that 3 years ago. You did not hear that phrase. We have the third largest in Wilmington of cities its size, in comparable size to the crime rate in Wilmington. We've got someone that was appointed, Lieutenant Governor Denn was appointed to oversee, as you said, the oversight agency, the Criminal Justice Oversight Agency, $6 million in stimulus money. And one of those points that you announced at that point in time in 2009 was to reduce the number of inmates who returned to prison after being released. Yet the report that was just issued this many years later says that the state of Delaware does not know what the number of the recidivism rate is. We have no benchmark. We have no way of understanding what violent criminals are out there that are being released. We have not done our homework, and we have gotten $6 million of money to do what we have not done while we continue to talk about it.
Let's move into discussion then on this point, and I'll let you respond.
Sure. Well, you asked me what my plan for crime was. Mrs. Valenzuela unveiled her plan to stop crime back in September, and I'm going to tell you what it is because I want to read it precisely. Part one is form cleanup crews to help people clear out neighborhoods blighted with trash and graffiti, and she said she was going to send volunteers armed with trash bags into the neighborhoods. Part two is keep the dialogue going, listen to neighborhood leaders and the police, and part three is build the economy, and that's the plan she released. That's it. Pick up trash, talk to people, and build the economy. And frankly, I don't think that the people who live in these communities would appreciate Mrs. Valenzuela telling them that part of the problem is that they don't clean up after themselves. But beyond that, that's not a serious approach to the problem, and this is a problem that really demands a serious approach.
I'll let you react to it, and then we'll
I
move
love
on to our
that.
next topic.
I'd love to. Thank you very much. It does not cost $6 million to put a sense of pride back into communities and to be neighbors helping neighbors. I think Rudy Giuliani did it. I think we can do it in Wilmington. I don't need $6 million to do every one of those points right there and to make a measurable difference. I will know what the recidivism rate is. I will have a way of reaching people, nonviolent offenders, with plans so that we get back onto the streets, out of the revolving door after graduating from crime college. They will have a better opportunity to move forward in their community.
Did you just say you were going to set up a crime college?
I'm saying we've got one right now. We've got graduates coming out of crime college, a revolving door right now. Yes, we don't know what the recidivism rate is. And that's a problem. If we've got those kinds of crime controls, public safety issues in Delaware, been given $6 million to solve it with no understanding 4 years later of what the recidivism rate is, and your study says that we need another study to study recidivism. This is a waste of taxpayer dollars, and there are victims on the street right now. And the cost of crime is costing Delaware taxpayers. We need to look at that as well.
Nancy, I don't know if you want us to get into what the $6 million was for or not, but it wasn't to study recidivism.
Okay, we'll let it go at that because I do want to broaden our conversation, and David's going to take us to our next topic.
Yeah, so I'm interested in knowing your positions on equal opportunity policies like affirmative action, including gender, disability status, veteran status, race, and ethnicity. Ms. Valenzuela, your small business, First Aid Manufacturing, is federally certified as minority-owned. Government agencies like the Department of Defense and other agencies have set goals that a percentage of their work will go to businesses like yours. Would you then call yourself a supporter of affirmative action?
I support affirmative action.
Okay.
I'm looking at the idea of creating jobs in a level playing field, and in fact have been asked by the state of Delaware and many times partnered with Governor Markell to help other people understand the certification process and the manner in which to help their businesses move forward as a result of that. Veteran-owned, we're also service-disabled veteran-owned. So the idea of working with the state of Delaware to help level the playing field, bring those dollars home to Delaware, yes, we've been not contracted, I've done it on a volunteer basis with Governor Markell, and actually have partnered with him on the first Entrepreneurial Governors Conference 2 years ago in 2009. So I appreciate his approach to doing this as well, and will continue to do that on a volunteer basis as long as I'm asked.
You have a 1-minute rebuttal.
The state has been very focused on trying to increase opportunities for women and minority-owned businesses in the state, and I think we've done a good job at it. We've lowered the threshold for contracts to allow for women and minority-owned businesses, which are often smaller businesses, to not have to go through the same type of very complex RFP processes that they used to have to be required to. So we've made that available for more state contracts, and we're starting to see some results from it.
Yeah, how pervasive is discrimination in the state of Delaware? Since you both seem to be supporters of affirmative action and equal opportunity programs, both in business and in perhaps education, how pervasive do you see discrimination in the state of Delaware?
I believe we have a problem in the state of Delaware, and it's one of the reasons that I want to step up and help us to improve that. Federal contracts are not as difficult across the board when I'm talking to businesses, and I am talking to businesses up and down the state, small businesses in particular, for close to 2 administrations worth of time. And it is almost impossible to break into the state contracting process. I believe crony capitalism is at work. I believe we've got a good old boy system here. I know that the state is interested in learning how to do that in a more efficient way. I believe we need to have different systems in place to do that, and we're working on that.
Is Mr. Denn part of the good old boy system here?
I believe if he's a career politician, it's a problem.
Right. Would you care to respond to that?
No, again, that's the Tea Party playbook, is call people names because people don't agree with you on the issues. And,
Would you like to speak to some of the things you've done to improve equal opportunity in the state?
well, I just mentioned we've made it easier for small businesses, which again, a significant number of women and minority-owned businesses are small businesses.
So more specific, how have you made it easier?
There was a dollar threshold that used to exist, and above that threshold, a formal RFP had to be issued rather than letter bids, which are much easier to put together and that small businesses are more capable of putting in. We increased the dollar threshold, so in other words, we allowed state agencies to make more contracts available with a less complex bidding process. That was actually specifically recommended by our state EEOC commission as probably the best way that we could open contracts.
I just want to remind that we are in the follow-up discussion, so this does not have to be point-counterpoint. If you want to
I appreciate
add
that.
something, you can. Same back to you.
But I think that's probably the most concrete thing that we've done. Again, it was recommended to us by the council that suggests ways to us to improve opportunities, and we did it.
Any suggestions about how we improve opportunities in terms of
Yes.
disparities in education?
Oh, well, let me just make a point, though, in terms of follow-up to what you just said, Matt. It's all about measurements. We can talk, and we talk and talk in Delaware, but the bottom line is, what are our improvements? Where are we in terms of national standards? We lag behind when it comes to women, minorities, small businesses, in terms of giving them to giving state contracts and helping them to engage in that process. We can talk about trying to increase, we can talk about wanting to do a better job, we can talk about talking about what we already talked about. It all boils down to what are the measurements. What are the measurements in terms of national standards, in terms of how government is working with small businesses, minorities in Delaware? We're not stacking up, and it really does matter. And when you go in that direction, you find that that is true, and you can actually increase success based on real numbers.
Do you have a final point that you want to make before we wrap up this topic?
Only that we took the step that our folks who give us their best advice about this from the business community told us would be most effective, and we did it, and I'm proud that we did it.
The lead off to this next question goes to you, Mr. Denn, but the point is to both of you, and that is you both agree that overhead in the state's education system is a blockade to success in the classroom. For Delaware's size, there's about 130,000 students in our public school system. We have 19 school districts. Let's take a look at Maryland, where they have 800,000 students and 24 school districts. So combined with Delaware's widely and long criticized school funding formula, should there be a system overhaul in education? We will begin with you.
What we've tried to focus on is the larger issue that you mentioned, that there is too much money spent on overhead and not enough money in the classroom. And as you suggested, people were talking about this for years. I'm the first person who actually came in, did something about it, and we're seeing some results. What we started doing in 2010 was publishing for each school district and publicizing to the taxpayers and parents in the school district how effective that district was being in terms of directing public dollars into the classroom and away from overhead. And this year we saw for the first time the results in the districts from the first year that we did that, and the results have been good. The gap between the districts that performed the best and the worst has narrowed significantly. We've saved about $5 million. There's about $5 million more going into the classroom than there would have been but for this process that we set up. And some of our larger school districts like Christina and Appoquinimink have significantly reduced the amount of money that they spend on overhead. So we're seeing forward progress. What we're trying to encourage the districts going forward is, to the extent that they can do things collectively with respect to purchasing. They already purchased telecommunications devices and business contracts collectively, but to the extent that we can get them to do more of that, we can have some pretty significant savings.
But do you think a system overhaul is needed to pare down the number of school districts?
I think paring down the number of school districts is something that there's a division of opinion about, and if we can get the costs down without going through the formal process of combining school districts, I think that's the way to go. I think that parents in Delaware like having access to their school administrators, like being able to have some influence over how their schools are run, and a smaller school district gives you that. But I think that we can have that and still deal effectively with the cost issue.
Thank you for the clarification. And your rebuttal on this topic.
I don't know where we get the idea that any parent likes the administrative waste. I think that taxpayers deserve accountability. If again, you're looking at this from a system overhaul, the answer is yes. The answer is if we're looking at what is working in other states, and you mentioned Maryland, if we can operate in states like that efficiently, more efficiently, we need to look at that. I like the idea that you have accepted my thought about centralized purchasing. We've been talking about that in our last few debates. It's the first time I've heard you bring that up tonight. I'm looking at the way we centralize our efficiency, and we don't do that with a bureaucratic approach. I'm talking to teachers up and down the state who are gathering pencils for their classrooms. The money is not reaching the front lines of our educators, and we have administrative, bloated administration, and that is where six-figure salaries are being spent, beyond more than the governor is making. And we don't need that in Delaware, and we certainly don't need it in 19
Let's
districts.
go into the discussion portion on the issue of education.
For the record, Nancy, we started centralized purchasing 3 years ago. Our districts have been purchasing some of the items that are easier to purchase collectively for the last 3 years. We insisted upon that as soon as we came in. What we're trying to do is to get them to do it in more areas, and where it gets more difficult is when there are items that are educationally specific, to try to get districts to purchase the same textbooks across district lines. I think is a good idea, but is more challenging than simply purchasing a phone contract. I think it's something that we can do, but it requires some work, and we're trying to encourage them in that direction.
Let me raise a point. Is this really about spending, or what about leadership?
It's exactly about leadership, and it's just my point I was just going to make. We are not trying to do anything. Administrators are taxpayers too, administrators of purchasing. So why would I be saying I'm going to try and do that? We're going to talk about it. Bring the people, if we've got 19 school districts, bring the owners, so to speak, of each of those school districts administratively together, and work on a process that, by God, everybody recognizes is more efficient, and let's go after it.
Is it that easy?
I think it absolutely should be. Why would it not be? And why would we?
Well, has it been done? Is that something that's going on now?
I met with the 19 school superintendents last week, and we discussed, they had a specific request about getting help with IT for the school districts.
Okay.
They have a lot more computers than they used to have, and they are having trouble maintaining them. And the very specific issue that we talked about was, we would like you to do this collectively.
But
We'd
at
like
the
you to
time
do it
that you
more
met with
efficiently.
them, did they air once again the perpetual complaint of the formula, of the unit formula for funding individual schools and individual districts, which creates a crisis when it comes to hiring in the summer for how many seats will be in the classroom, for how many teachers will be in that school? This seems to be something that is endlessly complained about in Delaware, and nobody's ever come up with the remedy.
I did, and I'm glad you asked the question. That had been a problem for a number of years, the fact that our school districts got their unit count funds in September, and that was causing them to make much later hiring offers than surrounding states to teachers, and we were losing a lot of good teachers. Senator Sokola and I wrote a bill that changed the date on which they get 98% of their funding guarantee back to the spring. So now school districts have a lot of confidence about what money they're going to have to hire teachers, and as a result, in the year that we did that, we went from hiring 64% of our teachers in August or later, all the way down to 46%. And that's still a long way from where we want to be, but we saw a tremendous improvement in that number just in 1 year, and we think it's going to continue moving in the right direction.
You have just a few seconds for a last word here.
I just look at this and say the idea that Matt met with the superintendents a week ago. We've been in office for 4 years. We've got spending issues. We've got bloated administration layers. We've got a problem with education in the state of Delaware. And I'm not looking for actually election year meetings. I'm looking for leadership. I'm looking for a way of solving the problems before
David will now open us up on our
Nancy,
next topic.
if I could, I meet with the superintendents all the time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Noted, but we do need to move on.
We're on the topic of leadership still. So in most states, including Delaware, the lieutenant governor serves as first in line of succession to the governor if the governor cannot fulfill his or her duties. So can you please explain, directly to you, if need be, are you prepared to be governor, and can you explain how you're prepared to be governor?
I wouldn't be stepping forward into this role if I was not aware of that and clear about that. I look at this as being an opportunity to successfully lead in terms of what I'm already doing in my own business and what I'm doing in the community.
Examples?
I serve on the Economic Development Panel in Delaware, and Milford. I actually chair that.
Okay.
My business is a multi-million-dollar business, and we're an international business, and we've been doing that for 15 years, working with the state in terms of providing economic development support. I am a member of the Workforce Investment Board, appointed to the executive level by Governor Markell, known as a job creator. Work very closely with the Department of Labor, have worked with 2 administrations, all on a volunteer basis, but because I'm very clearly connected to economic development in our state. I also have partnered recently in May, developed a public-private partnership with Delaware State University for a small business accelerator called First State Moves the Nation. It's being recognized on a national level as something that could help spur economic development, and at very little taxpayer expense, no taxpayer expense, just using basically the resources that are already in place for small businesses for measurable growth. So I have a track record of this. I have a history of this already in my own state, in my own community, and certainly in business when economic development is concerned, a very successful track record.
You have a 1-minute rebuttal.
Well, I've been working very closely with Governor Markell and most of the things that I mentioned at the outset in terms of steps forward that we've taken as partners. I'm hopeful that he's going to be the governor for the next 4 years because I think he's doing a great job, but I'm certainly ready to perform that task if necessary. I don't think that Delaware wants a Tea Party governor, and I think that's an important thing that people need to consider when they're thinking about who to vote for lieutenant governor. As I was starting to mention earlier, when Mrs. Valenzuela was speaking to a Tea Party group in Middletown this year, she compared the Supreme Court's upholding of the health reform law to planes smashing into the side of the World Trade Center. And I think that is just a view of the world that Delaware is not ready for. I don't think Delaware needs a Tea Party governor.
May I comment? I think that's very entertaining, Matt. I have also spoken to the Independent Party, and I don't know that makes me an independent, but anyway, it's extreme on your side to keep on making that
But
note.
did you say it?
I went to a Tea Party event. I don't know what you're talking about when you come up with those kinds of comments. I am not. You keep on making that Tea Party allegation. I would like to say one additional comment, though. In terms of what I do, and you asked about the ability to lead the state, I would do this 110%. Matt Denn has, for the last 4 years, taken a full-time salary for working part-time on full-time challenges that we have in the state of Delaware. I don't think that's right. I don't think that's fair. You've dedicated your time.
Let's let him respond to that. You've been working part-time on full-time issues?
No, I work more than full-time hours as the lieutenant governor, and anybody who works with me would tell you that. I also work 10 hours a week at a law firm in Delaware under rules that were set out for me by the State Public Integrity Commission very carefully. And they're the same rules that Mike Castle followed when he was lieutenant governor and also had a part-time legal practice. And I know that Mrs. Valenzuela and her colleagues in the Tea Party like to trash Mike Castle these days, but I actually think that he's a pretty good role model in terms of how to uphold yourself.
May I comment? I had lunch with Mike Castle today. I do not appreciate that allegation.
Let's take it to another topic. Staying on leadership, Mrs. Valenzuela, in a joint appearance with Mr. Craig in April, the two of you announced your candidacies for the state's top 2 offices, right? But since then, there hasn't been much campaigning together. Your names are not on each other's signs. We haven't seen very much in the way of advertising. Does this suggest that you're not on the same page with Mr. Craig?
Yes.
Talk about your
I want to answer your comment. I would like to also add that I had lunch with Congressman Castle today. These are shallow allegations. You need to do some homework. We run on a separate ticket in Delaware. The idea of announcing was what it was. I am a member of the Republican Party, and that is the way we do things in Delaware.
So is that a yes, you all are not on the same page? Or?
I'm not sure what you mean on the same page. We run on a separate ticket. And in a separate line.
Mr. Denn and Mr. Markell run on separate tickets, but they're running together.
I think that's interesting that there is a lot of wheeze going on in Matt Denn's comments because he wants to attach himself to Governor Markell. I've probably worked with Governor Markell on economic development more closely than I would suggest that my counterpart over here has. And I'm just looking at in terms of a track record. I've worked very successfully with Governor Markell, can work with whoever the people choose to elect.
Does this suggest you'd work more effectively with Governor Markell than Mr. Craig?
I have not worked with Mr. Craig. I have worked with Governor Markell. I would work with whoever the people choose to elect.
All right. Mr. Denn?
Sure. Well, I'm proud to be associated with Governor Markell, and when you talk to him in an hour and you ask him who's worked closely with him on economic development issues, I suspect that he will say that I have. I want to be very precise because Mrs. Valenzuela said that she didn't say something, so I want to tell you exactly what the quote was.
You have about 15 seconds.
That's all it'll
take. Let you know.
And we'll make the video available as well, but she compared the Supreme Court's decision on health care to, quote, seeing something slam into the World Trade Center. And again, that's just not that's a Tea Party view that I don't think is consistent with how Delawareans want to see the government.
I do need to close out this discussion portion on this topic because, believe it or not, that's it for the questions from Professor Wilson and I for this portion of our debate. We are now moving on to the questions that are coming from the students at the University of Delaware and Delaware State University. A reminder that you each have 1 minute to answer these questions. Our first question from a student comes from Ryan Leonard, a junior political science student at the University of Delaware.
Delaware has been very successful in attracting big businesses to the state, but a New York Times article over the summer was pretty critical of Delaware's overly lenient corporate tax policies and regulations. How do you envision Delaware fostering a strong business community going forward?
Mr. Denn, you're first.
Well, there's really two separate questions there, one of which is, are our corporate laws appropriate? And I think that they are, and again, I think that they're important to us in terms of maintaining our state's economy. And the second question that's incorporated there is, what are we going to do to help small business? And when I talk to small business leaders, which I do a lot, the number one issue that I hear from them is that they can't get credit from banks, that they're having difficulty being able to get the loans that they need to maintain their businesses and hopefully to expand and hire more people. So part of our focus has been trying to improve access to credit for small businesses. We have a small business credit initiative that has made it easier for some small businesses to be able to get access to credit at lower rates, or in some cases get loans that they otherwise wouldn't have been able to qualify for. And we've had some real good success stories there. What I would like to see us do going forward is to have some more state investment in that program. Right now it's only federally funded. I would like to see us start putting some of our state economic development money into that small business credit initiative.
1 minute.
I really look at Matt Denn's examples of small business and having some understanding of that as being like a mother that's never had, a woman talking about, or a man talking about it, having a baby when they've never had one. You know, as a proven job creator, I know what small businesses need, and that's why I've worked closely with Governor Markell and the previous administration to try and create economic development in a climate that would be more friendly to small businesses, especially. The majority of jobs come from that sector. But Fisker has been an example of what we didn't need to do. Roll the dice with a high-risk venture and something that taxpayers pay dearly for. When we create an environment for small business, we will be a magnet for all business. And this is what we can do in Delaware, and we can improve the economy in this way.
Moving on to our next student question, Joseph Zagara of the University of Delaware has our next question, and this is on the Affordable Care Act.
With Delaware being one of the first states that has decided to implement the Affordable Care Act's Medicaid expansion, my question is twofold. Is Delaware's healthcare infrastructure large enough to handle the influx of patients into our few hospitals? And how is Delaware planning to generate the added revenue to cover the cost of the expansion when the federal government lowers their funding after 2016?
You have the first 1 minute response.
That brings a smile to my face because I'm automatically thinking about the way it intends to fund it. And it is absolutely another cost to businesses, another cost to families. When I look at the, I have to call it Obamacare because I can't use the word affordable care when I'm talking about the way in which this will impact business. If you are a business, and we're an example of that, we have 75 employees. If we had 50 or under, we will not be affected by the cost to our overhead. 51, we pay dearly. What will this do to businesses that are looking to curtail their overhead? Will they grow to 52 or will they go to 49? I submit to you that we would definitely lower overhead for the most part, and we would not be able to take that on in an environment that's increasingly difficult to sustain itself, especially in Delaware. So we have problems. Do we want to provide good health care? Absolutely. Create jobs? We can do that.
Your 1 minute response.
Well, Mrs. Valenzuela gave the Tea Party answer, which is to criticize the federal law, but I don't think she answered the question, which was, number one, will the federal funds be adequate to pay for the expanded population? And the answer is yes. Right now, they've been guaranteed to us that the federal funds will cover the expanded population, and the governor's been very clear that if there comes a point when they no longer have that commitment, that the state will have to reconsider whether it will include that expanded population. We're including it now only because the federal government is paying for it. And the second question, which I think is a good one about whether the infrastructure is adequate, these folks are already getting treated in our hospitals. They're just showing up at the emergency room. So the infrastructure is already bearing the burden of these folks. What this expanded population should allow us to do is have these folks get preventative care and get the kind of care that would allow them to not have to show up in the emergency room. So ultimately, the impact on the infrastructure should be a positive one rather than a negative one.
Yeah, the Supreme Court has already ruled on the most controversial part of the Affordable Health Care Act, and that is the mandate. But there are a lot of aspects of the bill that are favorable, such as keeping children on one's insurance up to the age of 26, limits on payments, barriers related to pre-existing conditions. Why do you think Republicans at a national and state level want to repeal the act? Why not tweak it? Why not work with Democrats to show that you can come together and fix basic problems in legislation rather than repeal it? What's your opinion on that?
Well, you're probably, I mean, you're asking the wrong
I'm
candidate.
asking your opinion about their approach to politics and working together to try and solve problems.
Well, I'm very proud in Delaware of how I personally have worked with Republicans, both in the legislature and outside, on a number of projects. A lot of the things that I mentioned at the beginning in terms of accomplishments were done in a bipartisan way. That's how we do things in Delaware. And frankly, that's why I think it's not productive to have a Tea Party candidate who compares the health care law that you were just referring to September 11th in the lieutenant governor's spot. I think that is not conducive to the type of bipartisan process that's really benefited our state in the past.
Do you side with national Republicans, and would you favor repealing the Affordable Care Act?
I'm sorry, I just find that so entertaining. I guess I should start referring to you as a liberal extremist, and we can kind of go tit for tat there. I just look at the largest tax in the history of the nation, in the history of our country, as being what we are saying, you know, why do we work together with Republicans? We have one-party rule here. This is what I meant about being dangerous in terms of what it ushers in. And I, again, underline, whether that's Republican or Democrat, one-party rule.
So you would support repealing the act?
I absolutely would support repealing the largest tax in our country's history, yes. We have problems in healthcare, absolutely. And the best way to solve any problem is in the free market.
Give us an example of how we could do that in Delaware.
Come together in a form of coalitions in terms of being able to purchase outside state lines, increase the pool, do what we're doing more effectively. There is something that actually a doctor, and we could talk about this another time, a doctor, a lawyer, and an economist all in one package, by the way, one woman, has formed something called the Health Pact. Over 4,000 doctors are involved in that in terms of affordable care. That gives new meaning to what we're talking about.
If I could just say something, David.
We're moving on.
That is, to me, an amazing answer because it's even further to the right than Mitt Romney. Not even Mitt Romney supports completely revoking the Affordable Care Act anymore. He supports keeping some provisions of it in place. So that.
But we did get an answer to the question on where both of you fall as far as that issue is concerned. We're going to go to our next student question, and this one is from Edward Doxson of Delaware State University.
Considering the dramatic increase of the teen suicide rate in both Kent and Sussex counties, what do you plan to implement or support to help fight this alarming epidemic?
It is your response first. 1 minute.
Yes, I actually was speaking to somebody there. We had a program in Milford, I believe it's called Rachel's Choice. It has to do with what we're looking at as what the young student referred to as an epidemic. And that is heartbreaking to me. We've got an entire generation that is, Time magazine recently called Generation Screwed. I don't know whether it's the breakdown of the family, the hopelessness that we're seeing in our communities as a result of sustained joblessness, what is happening on our streets in terms of crime or in our public education system, but we obviously have major problems. I look at what the state has done in terms of its approach to that, and again, I'm looking at human lives and families being affected, and saw that it immediately implemented a study. I think that bureaucrats are famous for studies, all paid for by taxpayers without any result, without going into looking at the numbers and what we can do that is nationally effective and how we can incorporate it locally. That's what we would do.
You have 1 minute.
It's a great question. I personally went down to Johns Hopkins University with a couple other folks from the state and brought up the best folks in the country in terms of training high school and middle school teachers in suicide prevention, and they're actually providing that training free of cost to Delaware high school teachers over the next few months. They're actually using Delaware as a test ground for the country in terms of providing the best possible training to deal with what is obviously a very serious problem. We're also working with Hopkins to try to recruit 2 new child psychiatrists to Sussex County. they're very interested in an approach that we're trying to use with a psychiatrist named Mark Borer, who's located in Kent County, where we're going to try to have folks on the front lines who are working with kids, school nurses, pediatricians, do a lot more triage work and allow child psychiatrists to be a lot more effective in terms of noting potential problems and dealing with them up front. And a minute doesn't give us time, but we've actually have a few different initiatives underway that were recommended by this group, and actually it was a bipartisan group. Representative Ruth Briggs
It's interesting to see what is on the minds of the students in Delaware, and our final student question takes us to an environmental issue.
Cherry Island will eventually reach full capacity. If elected, what are your plans for the future of Cherry Island? And can the state make money off of recycling?
And you're up first on this one.
Well, the goal for the state is not to make money off recycling. I think the goal for the state is to encourage more recycling in at least a cost-neutral way. And I think that when we had the opportunity to have the bottle tax go away, and instead we decided to use that to ratchet it down and invest that money on a short-term basis in providing our recycling handlers the capacity to do more curbside recycling, that's exactly the direction that we went. I mean, obviously, recycling is something that we want to encourage. It's not something that we've tried to mandate, but we've tried to create the infrastructure to make it convenient for people, to make it something that people will get into the custom of doing. And I think our schools are doing actually a great job of teaching our kids the importance of recycling. I have 7-year-olds, and if I put something in the garbage that could go in their recycling, I hear about it pretty quickly. So I think that we're on the right path in terms of recognizing it as an important problem and trying to deal with it in a way that doesn't impose new costs on the state, but nevertheless allows us to deal with an important environmental issue.
I actually agree with Matt on this. I think we are doing a good job on incorporating best practices in what we're doing as a state in terms of definitely a generation of young people coming up with an understanding of what it means to take care of their environment. I grew up in a place that where the lake caught on fire in Cleveland, Ohio, and I think that we have come from a place where we have learned from history and a place where we can reduce the amount of government oversight in terms of what people are doing in their own backyards. As a woman, I know I care about that, and I don't need a government official to tell me how to do that. I think we are learning and have learned through history how to steward our resources, and I would look at that as a continued process.
We have a little bit of extra time. David has a question he's going to put on the table, but you will each have just 30 seconds to respond to this one to keep us on time.
Okay.
Yeah, so speaking about the economy and creating incentives for the state to do more infrastructure development, since 2000, Delaware's population has grown close to 15%, but the largest amount of growth has happened in Kent and Sussex counties. So doesn't it make good economic sense to invest in a railway that takes consumers and visitors of the state, north and south of the state? Shouldn't that be something we spend our tax dollars on?
Who do you want to answer first?
I believe you go first.
I love the idea of improving our transportation system in Delaware. I have a disabled son, and the idea of other states doing much better in terms of moving people effectively and efficiently is something that we need to improve in Delaware. We've got the perfect structure of a state, 3 counties, and look at how much we could do with an improved rail system or an improved transportation system. It's definitely on the top when it comes to economic development.
30 seconds is not much time to address this, but I do need to toss it to you.
Go ahead.
I won't even take 30 seconds. It's something that I think everyone would very much like to do, but we need to live within our means, and it's also something that is very, very expensive at a time when we have a lot of demands on our capital budget just in terms of maintaining the roads that we have. So I think if it's something that, if it happened, would be in the future.
Well, we are now moving on to our closing statements. So candidates, you will each have 1 minute for this, and you are up first.
Thank you. Thank you for having us here tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, I am a job creator. I'm a woman who can restore balance to our state government. The election is essentially a job interview because you're the employer. When you look at my opponent's non-performance and record of outright mismanagement, whether it's on jobs, crime prevention, the weatherization program, the list goes on and on, as an extreme progressive, he doesn't deserve to be rehired. Why would we rehire someone who shows up for a full-time job less than full-time when we have full-time challenges? Folks, we can do better. We can get our economy moving again. We can restore important checks and balances. And we can give a woman a seat at the table. I think we deserve at least one. I'm the person to do just that. Thank you.
Your closing statement.
Well, I think this election does give voters a pretty clear choice. I'm proud of what I've done as a full-time lieutenant governor, and I'm proud of what the governor and I have done together to get our state on the comeback trail. I would be honored to have another 4 years to finish the work that we started and to make this the best place in America to grow a business and raise a family. My opponent has very different views from mine, as you heard tonight. She's endorsed by the Tea Party and espouses many of its positions, and I don't. If you want hardline Tea Party views at the highest levels of state government, then you should not vote for me, because that's not what I'm about. I'm about working across party lines to move this state forward. It's what I've done for 4 years, and I would be honored to do it for another 4 years.
Thank you so much to both of you for fielding our questions and the questions that were presented by the students here tonight. This does conclude our debate for Delaware Lieutenant Governor, so I thank both of you very much. As we prepare for our next debate this evening, WDDE's Patrick Mares takes a look at some of the issues that are on the minds of voters in Delaware. Jobs and the economy top that list.
Delaware's quadrennial season of change is here once again. And while the slate of candidates differs with every election cycle, there's one issue that's always on the minds of voters.
The jobs. And that's what I think is the most important thing, getting this economy turned around.
I come from a conservative background, you know, religious and everything else, but in this economy, we can't afford to vote on simply religion or abortion, non-abortion. I think the most important decision is economic, you know, job focused.
Jobs that are available for people that, you know, where they can actually make a living and, you know, support themselves when they get displaced, when the, you know, economy changes.
People are still concerned. They're worried about their investments, their retirement. They're worried about their children's opportunities for jobs as well as their own jobs.
Longtime University of Delaware political science professor Joe Pyka has been following first state politics for more than 30 years.
Delaware's changed.
Even though Delaware's unemployment rate is lower than the national average, he says the local economy is going through a transition that's remaking the state and driving the issues.
I think what's happened is that we're probably more of a white-collar economy than we used to be, with both of the auto industry, both of the auto plants shutting down. Manufacturing and blue-collar workers don't have the same sort of position, I think, in the economy that they did have in the past.
With the well-populated North and rural South, Delaware has long held a reputation as a microcosm of the nation. So it's not a surprise, then, that other concerns of Delawareans also echo those heard across the country.
I think education remains a really hot topic, a major concern.
The most important issue would be health care. Would actually be health care, how they plan to disperse the welfare, and how they actually help us to get us out of our certain economy structure. In the next 10 to 15 years, whatever they don't correct now, it's going to cripple us later.
I think the main concern right now is just health care, just a different point of views and opinions in regards to the Democratic and Republican ideas as far as the future health and endeavors as far as the youth and the older Medicare.
I think the government is infringing too much on the churches. There's just a lot of things that just aren't what I think they should be.
Whatever your opinion, there's no disputing the importance of expressing it at the polls.
Without voting, you don't have an opinion. I mean, if your opinion isn't heard, it's you're basically not living, in my opinion, because the fact is to be living in a place and you don't even want to have your opinion heard, why are you here?
I think it's very important to vote because the next 4 years, we're either going to have same as, or we're going to have a change and try to get things turned around and moving.
We are Americans, and as Americans, we have freedom of speech and we have a right to vote. We have a right to at least breach our decision, even though our vote might not make the president because it's actually based off the electoral votes. We actually feel like we can make a difference.
Most people say voting doesn't matter, but it does. In the overall, you just never know how it's going to turn out.
It's the only way that I can do anything to change anything. If I don't vote, I don't have anyone to blame but myself.
It's a responsibility as a citizen.
Voters are ready to listen. Candidates are making their final pitches, and the clock is ticking down to November 6th. Patrick Mares,